Hello, Worldview listeners. I want to take a moment and give a shout out to my friend Luke and his team at increasecreative.co. This season of our podcast, Luke has been helping his team there to produce the content that I hope that's been a blessing and encouragement to you. It's been a help to me to have his behind the scenes work, and I want to give him a shout out and let you guys know about his company. Increasecreative.co is a great partner for you to consider for powerful church communication. Luke's team can create custom websites, compelling graphic designs. They help with original video and, as you've noticed, original podcast content. It allows people like you, people like me, to connect with our communities. So I'd encourage you to let them handle the creative aspect of what you need help with so you can focus on your mission. Take a moment, visit increasecreative.co to learn more about how Luke can help you. That's increasecreative.co.
Welcome to Worldview, a podcast featuring teaching and conversations with Dr. Mike Lester that focus on helping faithful disciples develop a biblical worldview. Thanks for joining us, and here's your host, Mike Lester.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode here of Go Forward, is what we're calling this season of the Worldview podcast. I'm excited about the opportunity that we have had to discuss already this new year of 2026. We're looking at this first big movement of a process of how to move forward when the path doesn't seem clear. We tried to sort of survey the landscape. That's what we're doing right now in this first movement. We're surveying the landscape, and we have tried to assess the situation. Just give me the facts. In the last episode, we talked about not just assessing the situation, but getting the big picture, not losing perspective of the fact that God writes a long story. This final step today of this opening movement of the process of learning how to lead when the path isn't clear, how to go forward when everything is saying stop, don't move, be paralyzed, and be overwhelmed. How do we move forward? The last step in this sort of pre-decision process is learning how to identify the fear that is stopping us. We've all heard the famous statement by Franklin Roosevelt, right? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. You've heard this. Sometimes, because of maybe an overusage of a very important principle, we lose it in somewhat of a cliche or something maybe trite. And yet, if we were to just think about the profundity of that statement, fear paralyzes. I enjoy reading history. I know many of you do as well. And one of the dark spots in American history is the Civil War. During this period of time in the 1860s, it's brother fighting against brother. 4 long, horrendously brutal years. During this time, there are nearly 750 casualties, 750,000 casualties. The Union Army lost 390,000 in that ballpark. Confederate losses were put at about 360,000. The American dream that was launched in this great land of liberty, and roughly 100 years from its founding, that American dream was nearly extinguished. One particular battle from that brutal 4-year period is a small microcosm of what I'd like to talk to you today about the subject of fear. It takes place at the Battle of Antietam. The Union Army present at that particular battle is General George McClellan. From a military standpoint, McClellan had every strategic advantage. The number of soldiers he had was far superior to the number of forces that General Robert Lee had on the Confederate side. He had obtained defensive intelligence from a lost Confederate soldier that providentially they found, and the information was very accurate. He held favorable ground. I mean, from a military perspective, this could be the moment to end this war, and to use an expression from that great prophet of old, Barney Fife, it's time to nip it in the bud. But despite all of these advantages that a general could desire, McClellan never pressed the attack. He refused to do so under the counsel of his own men. They were encouraging, sir, we have the numbers, we have the high ground, we have good intel, everything favorable for victory is in our hands. And he refused to press the attack because in his mind, he was convinced that Lee's forces were much larger than they actually were. Stephen Sears, an American historian, wrote that McClellan actually believed he was outnumbered by nearly 25%. He had superior numbers, but in his mind, he was outnumbered. As a result of that, he never pressed the attack. He never took occasion to use the advantages handed to him. As a result of that indecision, the entire Union Army froze under a fear-induced hesitation. Hindsight being 2020, today most historians look back to this moment and believe that McClellan, had he pressed the attack decisively, the Civil War probably could have ended 2 years earlier, and it would have saved thousands upon thousands of lives for both sides. It would have cut the war in half, and the devastating effects. Wow. Hindsight being 2020, history could have been rewritten in a much different way, could it not? These are just these moments where in the thick of it, it doesn't maybe seem like that big of a deal, but this fear-based indecision had such a wide sweeping repercussion. From a leadership perspective, McClellan had every conceivable resource needed for victory. Does that sound familiar to us as ministry leaders? He had the information, he had the opportunity, he had the resources, but he chose to magnify or exaggerate the danger and minimize the God-given abilities and resources he had been entrusted with. To say it simply and bluntly, fear kept McClellan from going forward. Fear allowed his enemy to live and fight another day. Fear caused the impossible circumstances to be extended by another full 2 years. I just see such a parallel in McClellan's situation and in situations in my own leadership journey. Not to the same extent that thousands upon thousands are dying needlessly because of a decision. I mean, I'm not saying it's not that type of a parallel. But hindsight being 2020, I do look back and see that there are moments when perhaps fear kept me from moving forward. We don't call it fear. We have other names for it. We'll flesh that out perhaps in a moment. If we could see the future, I know every one of us would make different decisions. And here's the irony. As ministry leaders, we are following one who does see the future, who knows the future. And yet sometimes we just struggle to trust. Fear. In the Red Sea narrative, it's really easy to note the fears of the people in the text. They're afraid to go back because of the Egyptians. They're afraid to go forward because of the Red Sea. They're stuck, trapped in that throes of what we call the paralysis of analysis. And yet Moses is still called to lead them forward. We probably shouldn't be too quick to judge the fledgling nation for their lack of faith and for their overextension of fear, because more than likely each of us have found ourselves in a similar situation where fear has gripped us. And yet we hear God still whispering, tell the people to go forward. Tell the people to go forward. Tim LaHaye wrote in his book, Transforming Your Temperament, that fear is the paralyzing emotion that inhibits or restricts normal feelings of love, confidence, and well-being. On any normal day, we love stronger, we're more confident, and we are more in tune with our own well-being. But fear steps into that mix, and wow, it's such a different recipe. It appears in the New Testament that Timothy struggled with this as well. Paul would often be calling him to courage and reminding him not to be ashamed, or to remind him that God doesn't give us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of a sound mind. But fear isn't static. Fear is dynamic. It shifts as our circumstances change. For example, in the pioneering stage, we can fear failure because survival feels tied to our success. But later, as we see the ministry that we have founded or launched or started or restarted, as we see it starting to bear fruit, we fear innovation because we don't want to disrupt what God is doing. In the early days, we're innovating and trying, we'll just whatever sticks to the wall. We're not afraid to try it because we've got to do something. But when that pioneering stage is over, we're afraid to try something new because we don't want to mess it up. Fear. It just adapts to whatever part of the journey we're on. In the Bible, some variation of the theme, fear not, comes to us in somewhere around 150 times, because it's a reality that we all face in a fallen world. And it takes so many different forms and so many different faces as well. Fear of failure because of identity issues being wrapped to what we view as success. Fear of loss because we feel like we're a failure if we don't win every game or every event or every challenge. Regardless of what the underlying motives are and emotions are and the fears are, regardless of what those underlying things are, we have to learn to be honest with ourselves. Not what we tell everybody else outside that we're leading. How you doing? I'm fine. But have moments of clarity with ourselves and just be honest. What is it we are afraid of? What fear are we allowing to control the situation, to restrict us from making a decision to move forward? Rick Warren, in his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, said that fear is a self-imposed prison that will keep you from becoming what God intends you to be. You can only move against it with the weapons of faith and love. You know, fear isn't created in the difficult moments. It's only amplified. If you have a fear of heights, that fear isn't created when you climb a mountain. It's only amplified when you get up there. If you have a fear of failure, you may not think about it until it's time to make a big decision. The big decision didn't create that. It amplified it. So often, past experiences with harsh criticism sometimes form us to fear failure. Maybe high expectations thrust upon us as children play a role. More often than we want to admit it, we carry this subconscious, internalized belief that our worth or our value is tied to our performance. We don't say that because we know that's not the right thing to say. That would be ungodly. That would be unspiritual. That would be unbiblical. We know it theologically. I'm not talking about theologically right now. I'm just talking about practically. Sometimes we're guilty of swallowing this lie that if we somehow make a wrong decision, that we lose our value in God's eyes and people's eyes, and so our value is so diminished we can never come back from it. And And that fear paralyzes us so that now we don't even realize that our indecisions are becoming our decisions. If we were to pull back the layers of fear, like, picture maybe like how you pull back the layers of an onion. At the root of all that is probably some type of deep-rooted thinking that's flawed, that just needs to change. Think about some of these statements and see if they either have subconsciously been held by you, or when they are said, they sort of strike a chord like, I don't want to admit it, but yeah, probably so. If I make the wrong call, everything is going to collapse. Now, look, team, the only acceptable outcome here is perfection, because God's work deserves our very best. There's a flaw there, isn't it? Because our very best isn't perfection. Anyway, how about this one? Man, this it's just all on me. It's just I feel the weight. It's all on me. How about this one? I just can't disappoint God's people. God's been too good to me, and God loves these people. There's no way I want to disappoint them. Notice that in each of these statements, there's a kernel of truth. There's a point of truth, but it's distorted in such a way that what starts out as maybe with a germ of truth becomes so distorted it's now really fear masquerading as spiritual truths and principles. What a trap. What a trap. In saner moments, if I were sitting across from you and you were counseling me and I were saying these things, you would call them out. You would say, Mike, you just got some flawed thinking here. But we don't see it often when it's in our own hearts. One writer wrote, some days it's a historic act just to refuse the paralysis of fear, straighten up, and step into another day. Sometimes that just feels heroic, just to take one small step. Fear rarely announces itself to you honestly. It appears under different names, different terms. It comes to us under the guise of weighty hesitation. I just want to be absolutely sure. I want to think about this a little bit longer, and we overthink it. Sometimes it masquerades as righteous indignation or anger. Sometimes it masquerades as a hyper sense of responsibility. Look, you don't understand the weight of leadership here. And the weight of leadership is a heavy mantle. And so I need to pray about this for probably another 17 years before I make this decision. Notice that there's elements of truth in these scenarios, but they're distorted to the point that fear has slipped into that nugget of truth and has basically commandeered it. And it's not spiritual wisdom that's bringing about the hesitation. It's fear of failure or loss or embarrassment or disappointment or whatever it may be. Fear of losing our identity, fear of losing our reputation, fear of being viewed as incompetent or not a good leader, because that would kill our ministry career. Self-preservation kicks in, and where once there was faith and a God who could do the impossible, now there's fear in the impossible situations. And that dynamic, frankly, it just becomes further compounded by the silent cultural scream that says no fear, no fear, no fear. We absorb those cultural cues, and we begin to think that admitting fear is somehow a disqualifying weakness for a leader. So we hide it. We hide it under a mask of competency because we fear having a diminished authority. And we begin to substitute biblical leadership for some type of toxic version. We set up reality, an impossible standard to measure ourselves against. Our internal voice begins to shout, be decisive, be unshakable, be right. Here's the irony. If we acknowledge fear, we become enslaved to it. The refusal to identify, let me say that, I think I may not have said it quite accurately. Let me just make sure I said it clearly as my mind is running ahead of my mouth. If we cannot, I think I may have said can, if we cannot acknowledge the fear, if we can't be honest and acknowledge it, then the irony is we actually become enslaved to it. The refusal to identify the fear doesn't make it smaller. It makes it stronger. When we give ourselves permission to tell the truth about those things that frighten us, whether it's a loss of identity or a loss of reputation or some other type of insecurity or whatever it is, that's when we can begin to disarm the power that fear holds over us. We can begin to reclaim the grounded, humble strength that Paul told Timothy that the gospel produces in us, a sound mind. It's only as we begin to identify and admit and refuse to ignore these internal fears that the external problems can become clearer, because we're removing the filters that are distorting the view. A clearer perception of the problem allows us to look to God and his solution so we can continue to go forward. It's a lot to digest. I get it. And I know that I am dancing around subjects that we don't talk about in public. And I've just decided that let's talk about the elephant in the room. Sometimes as leaders, whether leading ourselves, leading our families, or leading ministries or organizations, there are fears. Our identity can get wrapped into it. I can wrap my identity around, I'm the president of Paralyzes Baptist College. What does that mean? I don't wake up in the morning and look at a nameplate that says Mr. President. I work very hard to make sure that's not my identity. There's something appealing about the title, and my flesh can go there, just like yours can. But if I start finding my identity there, then what happens when that opportunity is gone? And so this idea of recognizing fear of losing identity or fear of losing reputation or fear of confronting our insecurities. You've seen the power of insecurities when we don't deal with them. I'm sure you have. If you've been in ministry any length of time, you've observed two beloved servants of God with slightly different philosophies attacking each other from pulpits because of their own insecurities. They don't want people to follow someone who does that a little bit differently than they do. I forget the name of the other individual in this story. I wish I could remember it because he deserves to be remembered. For the life of me, I can't remember it. We're going back to the days of Spurgeon and the Metropolitan Tabernacle there in London. And Spurgeon lit up the pulpit one Sunday morning against another preacher across town, and I could almost see his name. And it's going to come to me when I hit stop on this recording. But he just was blasting him. And of course, it gets printed in the papers. So people come to the other pastor. What will be your response to Mr. Spurgeon in this week's sermon? His response was something like, "We'll come and see." That next Sunday morning, that particular pastor whose name escapes me said, "I know that perhaps some of you here this morning because you've read the papers, and that paper has made you aware of a well-respected ministry here in town that God is doing a wonderful work with, whose pastor is Mr. Charles Spurgeon. And I think most of us would understand that Mr. Spurgeon, with some of the ministries that he leads, with those orphanages, there's always a need. I'd like our church this morning to try to help meet one of those needs. We're going to take up an offering today for one of Mr. Spurgeon's orphanages, and I want you to give generously. And they did. That pastor went to Spurgeon. He didn't try to combat. He didn't try to confront. He just said, hey, preacher, we're in this together. I want to be a blessing to you. And our church has collected this to help with the needs of the orphanage here. And Spurgeon looked at the man, and it was something to this effect: you've been the bigger man. And he began to confide in him about the lesson he had learned. We sometimes think of Charles Spurgeon as this great, booming preacher with no flaws, but he had flaws. He had insecurities. We sometimes think about the apostles as flawless, but read the New Testament carefully, and there was insecurities. You just see it if you start looking for it. And so, how do we go through this idea of identifying the fear with some practical steps and bring this episode to a close? Well, if you're still with me, and I haven't scared you off by talking about the proverbial elephant in the living room, let me just give you some simple thoughts here about identifying the fear that's keeping you and keeping me from going forward. Number one, say the fear out loud. Whether that's verbally, God, I'm at this difficult moment. I'm afraid to make a decision, and here's why. You know it. I know it. I've wrapped my identity up into this. I've ceased to see myself as your servant, and now I'm seeing myself as this great leader. And this fear and this insecurity of failure, it's paralyzing me. Maybe it's written down. I am afraid right now because. Here's the point. Fear loses its power in the dark or in the light. It loses its power in the light, and it grows in the dark. If you're afraid of conflict, you're afraid of losing friends or losing face or failure or identity loss, whatever. Name the fear, and you'll find that's the first step to neutralizing it. Second step, just practical. Recognize the story that you're telling yourself. Your fear is more than an emotion. It's interpretation. Dig deep and ask the hard questions. Maybe you're assuming motives. Maybe you're predicting outcomes that only God knows. And maybe you're hoping to become a self-fulfilling prophet. I don't know. Maybe you're guilty of believing lies about God or yourself. But learning how to shine the light in the dark areas where fear lives, it helps us distort truth from fantasy. Because truth always brings freedom. You'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free. It'll set you free. So recognize that if you're listening to the fears, there's a story that you're telling yourself, and it's not the right story. It's a distorted story. Number three, separate threats from truth. Maybe take a piece of paper in a quiet place in two columns, column A and column B. Column A, if this goes sideways, here's what I'm afraid will happen, and here's the list. And maybe the other list is, actually, here's what's really true. Here's what the facts say. This person has been with me for 15 years. They have constantly verbalized that they are for me, that they trust me, and I'm afraid of offending them or letting them down. Have they really expected perfection from me, or is that just my assumption? Many fears evaporate under the weight of reality. If they don't evaporate, they at least become more manageable because the exaggerations are removed. Step 4, just practical steps here. Identify what the fear is trying to protect. Almost every fear is trying to protect something: reputation, comfort, approval, control. That's a big one for our leaders, isn't it? Safety, identity, whatever. Fear is trying to protect them. So get to the root of it. What are you afraid of losing? Number 5, trace the fear to its source. past wounds, past failures, or maybe disappointments you've seen in other leaders that you were so disappointed you don't want to do this to someone else, and so as a result you're afraid of replicating the cycle, and so you're just doing nothing. Maybe criticism has played a part. Maybe it's burnout. Maybe it's insecurity brought about by comparison. Maybe it's just spiritual attack. Sometimes it's just mental fatigue or physical fatigue. But as we learn where the fear is coming from, what's the source of this is springing up out of, it gives us an idea of how to counteract that story, that narrative in our mind with truth. It allows us to pinpoint that source. Wait a minute, that person may have disappointed me, but God didn't disappoint me, and God still worked us all together for good. And look at what God's allowed me to do now. Wait a minute, do I trust God to be God, or do I feel like I have to be God? So now we're pinpointing truth to the area where that maybe fear was springing from. Number 6, evaluate. This is a big one. Evaluate the cost of fear-induced paralysis. For McClellan, the opening illustration of today's podcast, the cost of that was 2 more years of protracted war, extended war, 2 more years of death and bloodshed, 2 more years of a country being ripped apart. That was a high cost that his fear exacted. If we don't move forward through this Red Sea moment right now, this difficulty, this, I need to leave, but the path isn't clear. If we do nothing, what do we lose? Who gets hurt if we don't make the tough decision? What opportunities do we miss if we do nothing? Sometimes the cost of not moving is far greater than the risk of moving forward. And then finally, I would just say, as we're trying to identify the fear, build a trusted group of support team people. Support people that speak truth into your life. 2 are better than 1. In leadership, having mentors that are ahead of us in the journey is a great and valuable resource. So share that fear with someone you trust, who's a little bit further. Maybe it will resonate with them. Maybe they've dealt with something similar and can sort of walk you off the proverbial ledge and help you take the next step forward. I want to end today with something positive, and then I'm done. I started today's episode with a negative illustration of what fear can do in an overwhelming environment. We talked about McClellan's paralysis. I want you to picture now another illustration with a positive outcome. This particular illustration, if there was a legitimate reason to just do nothing and be afraid, be very afraid, it's this particular occasion. The year is 1915. We're still around that 9/11 era. Ernest Shackleton, if you know the name, his ship Endurance has been trapped in the Antarctic ice. His crew is facing starvation, freezing temperatures, isolation. There's 0 chance of being rescued. That type of difficulty and that type of environment is a natural place. You just become so overwhelmed, you're paralyzed by that fear. But history tells us a different story. Shackleton famously told his crew, difficulties are just things to overcome, after all. So he led his crew on a desperate, impossible march across ice. He didn't lose a single team member. In the face of fear, he opted to move forward. His example, along with so many examples from past leaders, reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is forward movement despite it. So we have assessed the situation. We've tried to understand the big picture. We've taken a step back and tried to survey God writing long stories. We've identified a paralyzing fear that keeps us from moving forward. This is all part of that first pre-decision process. It's the getting the facts. This is stage one. This is movement one. These 3 steps here. In our next episode, we'll start to move into the second part of the process, and that is, how do we start to make a decision? We've gotten our mind wrapped around the situation correctly. We know the big picture. We know where our weaknesses are and the fears that are trying to beset us. So now what do we do after that? So I'm excited about jumping into that with you in our next episode. Thanks for listening today. I really appreciate the fact that you would find value, that you would think that there is encouragement for us as leaders to be able to be challenged like iron sharpening iron to continue to move forward, even when the path doesn't seem clear. Well, thanks for being part of that journey. And I look forward to seeing you at our next episode here at Worldview with J. Michael Lester. Until then, may the Lord richly bless you. I'll see you in our next episode.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Worldview with Dr. Mike Lester. You can connect with Mike at jmichaellester.com, where you'll also find more discipleship resources. Mike also serves as the president of Veritas Baptist College, an online university dedicated to training ministry leaders virtually so that they can stay where God has called them. Learn more about Veritas at vbc.edu. This podcast is hosted by Dr. Mike Lester and produced by Luke Clayton and the team at increasecreative.co. We hope this episode has helped you grow in your journey of being a faithful disciple of Jesus. And we look forward to having you join us again right here on Worldview.